Hey everybody, what's up? Gary Simon here. So today we are going to step into the world of front-end development, and we're going to take this design here, and I actually created this UI design on a live stream about a month ago. I'm going to link it into the YouTube description here below so that you can see that if you want to follow along. And basically, I created this UI design from scratch while live, just to see what I could do coming up with something live, This is basically maybe perhaps for a future personal website of mine. I'm not sure if I'm going to use it, but a lot of people ask me, it's like, okay, we did the prototype, the mock-up here in Adobe Experience Design, Adobe XD. How do we take this and make it a reality in the browser with HTML and CSS and make it responsive and do mobile first? So that's what we're going to do. I've done a few of these in the past. People seem to like them. And so, yeah, we're going to write from scratch all the HTML and CSS necessary to make this thing right here work in the browser. Now, as always, make sure to subscribe and let's get started. Before we begin, there's never been a better time to try Linode. From now until May 31st of 2020, Linode is giving every single account access to object storage for free. That's right. Whether you create an account all the way back in 2003 or even just today, you can take advantage of free object storage until April 30th of 2020. What is object storage, you might ask? Well, object storage is an easy way to store and access data without the need for running a server. It's perfect for data that doesn't regularly change, like images and other multimedia files, important backups, or giant archives for servers that might need more storage space. One of the best use cases for object storage is hosting your own static website. You can have a site up and highly available on Linode's object storage with as little as an HTML and CSS file. To give object storage a try for free and get an additional $20 on your new Linode account, sign up at linode.com/design course. All right, so here we go. We have, it's not an empty folder as usual. I decided to pre-populate it, but just to show you, the index.html is pretty much empty. We've only linked up a CSS/main.css file here. And this over here is just one single Sass file, main.sass. I do have the live Sass compilation plugin, so it's watching it and it's converting it automatically here in Visual Studio Code to CSS. Of course, that's blank as well. We have images. There's these four graphics here, and let's just take a look at the mockup real quick. And this is what our task is to take this mockup that I created, last month or so. Again, I may or may not actually use it for my own site. And we need to take this and make it a reality in the browser with HTML, CSS, and make sure it's responsive. So we're going to be doing mobile first. Now, unfortunately, I do not have the actual mobile prototype mockup. So I'm going to do this on the fly. And our goal, though, is to get to here, which is like the desktop view. All right. So one of the first questions that you should have when you're beginning this process of converting a mockup or a prototype, I just woke up like 10 minutes ago, to HTML and CSS is, what image assets do you need? Well, clearly we have this ugly photo of myself, and that's one of the photos called bg.jpg. That's in the images folder. We also have these little icons, and then we also have these SVG logos right here. And of course, I didn't have time to finish and get four unique ones, so I just kind of repeated these right down here. And that's all. So those are the four assets that we have. All right, so I'm also using the Live Server plugin. So again, that's the only two plugins that we have. So Live Sass compilation and Live Server. All right, so when you install the Live Server plugin, you can right-click, open with Live Server, and that's what this little window over here is for. Notice it's kind of like very width-wise, it's small, like in the context of a mobile app or a mobile device, right? So we want to go mobile first. We don't really need to worry about this part too much, though, because we need to get the HTML. The HTML is the HTML. It's always going to be the same, regardless of the device. But once we get to the CSS, that's when this will start to become important. So for now, I'm just going to hide this right there. Okay, so let's get started with the HTML. And one of the first things that it makes sense to do is just to go from top to bottom, right? Your HTML should reflect that nature of going from top to bottom. So looking at this, we have to ask ourselves, what would be the very first element that we need to create an HTML wrapper or an element for? This right here, this graphic, right? It's the very first thing. If you're looking at this from going from top to left, we see it's this element right here. We're going to have to create some type of HTML element that will allow us to create this purple photograph sort of container. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so that is going to be, if I switch back over here, we're going to call that a hero-wrapper. Now, one thing I'm also going to use is the Emmet abbreviations. Basically, Emmet allows you to write HTML faster. So if I wanted to create by hand without using Emmet, it would look like this. Div class, I'd have to do this less than sign, type in div, and then the class equals hero-wrapper. Using Emmet, we could do this instead. Period, which means class, hero-wrapper. Hit enter, and it just creates it for us. So I have a tutorial. Go to my channel, do a search on Emmet, and you'll find that tutorial on how to use this, because you can do a lot of really cool things with it to save time. All right, so we have our hero wrapper, and that's going to take care of this element this whole big element right here. So now we have the stuff inside of it, right? Well, you would think maybe now we have to specify the logo. Well, not quite. If you think about it, and this is just temporary, there is an entire container around all this content that is centering it, right? Centering it in here. So we need a wrapper for that. So I'm just going to call that a class of wrapper. All right. Then up here, going back, we have another container right here, right? And we can call that our header. So the header will contain the logo and the navigation right here. So we can use the HTML semantic tag of header for that. Next up, we have the logo, right? So we're going to use just a regular hyperlink for that. I'm just going to put in a period logo. So that's going to give us an A element with the class of logo. And then we're going to make it go nowhere because this isn't going to be a full project just yet. And then my name, and that's it. Normally you would put like an image, like an SVG, if you had like a regular logo in there. Next up, going back, we have our navigation. So our navigation in and of itself has its own series of wrappers around it. So what I like to do is use the HTML semantic tag of nav. And then I like to use an unordered list because that is a list of things, right? It's a list of links, home, about, contact, right? So UL, LI, and then we're going to say A, and this is just going to go to index.html. This is going to say home, and now I'm going to hit Shift, Alt, and down to replicate that 2 more times. This will be about, and then this, of course, will be contact. So let me change that, and then that. All right, so that's it for the actual navigation or the header portion. If you look over here, we only have 3 links, right? And so I'm always talking about this. In a mobile, like a real small mobile device, maybe like an older iPhone, we would actually have enough room to show home, about, and contact, which means we don't need to put a hamburger menu for the mobile devices. We can just show these right off the bat because it's less clicking, right? So for UX, that's a better thing. And also for the HTML, that means less markup because we don't have to create an HTML element like an SVG file or whatever, like an image tag for that specific hamburger menu. So we're just going to show this all the time, no hamburger menus. Next up, we have this element, right? We have this and this. You can think of this as a wrapper as well if you want it to be, like this. So now what we'll do, and remember, it's still inside this container. Remember the wrapper container? It's still inside of that. So armed with that knowledge, we want to come down here, right there, and we could just put our H1 element right here because it's still inside of our wrapper, right here. But I wanted to be able to specifically move those elements around easily, these two, And so with that said, I'm going to give them their own wrapper. So that's going to be called hero content. And this will be H1. I help millions of people learn stuff. And then also a paragraph of subtitle and teaching UI, UX, and AMP. There we go. That's the ampersand code that you have to use. And then front end development. There. So far, so good. This is what our ugly HTML looks like so far. Okay. So now that whole section is accounted for with our HTML. So this whole section is taken care of. Exciting. Now we just have this bit of stuff. And of course, this is kind of like an unfinished site. Like I would have more content, but this should just be enough to get your feet wet with this sort of thing anyhow. So we have the next section. Where does that begin, right? So if you look at the backgrounds here, we have an image background up here. That's accounted for. We have a slightly lighter purplish right here in this whole section. And then we have like this darker purple down here. So what we need to do is create a wrapper for this whole section right here. All right. So coming outside of our hero wrapper, because our hero wrapper is that pink sort of saturated image, we're going to have one called light purple wrapper. There. Again, you can name this stuff whatever you want, whatever makes sense, and whatever will make, it'll be easiest to deal with in terms of reusing the project in the future. And then we also need to have that, we're going to use that same wrapper class, because notice it has the same amount of alignment as the top one. So this was wrapper. This is also going to be div class wrapper as well to a certain point. And you can see that these extend beyond that. And when we get to that point, I'll let you know what we'll do. All right. So we're going to have our wrapper. Then what is it next that we have? We have this right here. We have this unordered list of things, right? So we have to account for that. So we're going to say ul.stats, and we're going to give it a list item, and we're going to say strong, and we'll say 26.5 million. And then also we'll wrap these in a span tag, and this will say YouTube views. All right, so the reason I'm wrapping this element, like the little labels right here, in a span is because it's going to allow me to reference that specific CSS selector, and it'll allow us to move it around easily. So that's why, and style it better specifically. So that's why I've done that. So this is a strong, this is a span. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to copy and paste off the screen on my reference code the rest of these because you don't want to sit there watching me type all those other ones out because it's repetitive. There. So same thing, same exact markup. It's just reflecting the content right here. Now these things, these dividers, we're not going to add those in initially because we're not going to have a lot of space on a mobile viewport, but we'll do that on the full desktop view. Next up is right here, this carousel, right? Now the carousel, the buttons extend to the left and to the right, and there's multiple ways to achieve things in CSS. So the way I decided to do it, you probably could take these and do a position absolute on both of those and position those in CSS, but I'm deciding to break outside of the container, the wrapper, and have our own custom extended wrapper, if that makes sense, which if it doesn't now, it will. So what I'm doing here is I'm coming outside of this closing div tag, which is the wrapper up here, and I'm going to create my own extended wrapper. So extended wrapper, and I'm also going to give it an additional class called carousel container. All right, so the carousel container, you'll see how this comes into play later on. Now if we're going to use our first image, the source is going to be images arrow SVG, and I'm going to call this move testimonials to the left. We're not going to actually make the carousel function in JavaScript. I just wanted this to be a strictly HTML and CSS tutorial. It's already going to be quite long. Maybe I'll finish it in a different tutorial. We'll do UL carousel. So the next thing is the actual carousel that we have to create, and a list item. So again, we're using another unordered list because these are a list of things, right? So inside of here, we have the actual list item is going to be this pinkish or lighter purple background container, and then we have to create the HTML for this and this. We'll use a block quote and a cite tag for those two elements. All right, so what those will look like, I'm just going to paste these in off the side here. Just a block quote, and it's just the same content that you see in Adobe XD. And the little dash that we see here, we're going to create that purely in CSS, so we don't need HTML for that. So now I'm just going to go ahead and take our list item, because we only have two of them, and just paste that in right there. I don't care about keeping the content unique at this point. And then finally, we're going to take this. Now, normally you would also want to have an ID of left arrow, perhaps. That way, when you get to the JavaScript, you can access it. And then also, we could do a class of arrows. So now we're going to take this. That's the left arrow. And then after the carousel, we're going to have a right arrow. So this would be right arrow. And then move testimonials to the right. And we're using the same arrow. In the same arrow, actually, if you look at it, it's not going to show you a preview. It's this one right here. But in CSS, for the right arrow, which is flipped, we're going to rotate it so that it's pointing that way. That way, we don't have two unnecessary requests to download another image, which is essentially the same. It's just flipped. We could do that with CSS. All right, so now we're done with this section, and now we have this little section right here. Now, this is just a different aesthetic approach where I have this this title, and it's kind of just overlapping this container. So really, if you think about it, if I hide these things or deselect them, it's kind of just like this, except we're going to be using CSS to position it right there, because I thought that looked cool. It's just like a subjective, little design difference that I've done. So it is its own section though. So we're going to treat the HTML as if this was down here, but we'll use CSS to push it up there, if that makes sense. All right, so now what we'll do, going back here, let me close that out, is we're going to get fully outside of our last div container, because remember, this div, this closing div tag, is in reference to extended wrapper. No, it's in reference to our light purple wrapper right here. You see the line goes all the way down here. So now we're going to go outside of that, and we're going to say div class wrapper, because again, it's centered just like all the other stuff. And I'm going to give it another wrapper here, class rather. One called move up. That's going to allow us to use CSS to move it up. And then also, I am going to add another one called vertical padding. You'll see how that comes into play later. H2. And again, when I initially write the HTML for the first time, like when I was preparing this lesson, I didn't have like V padding added. Like I realized I needed another class in order to add this and to make it work in terms of working with the padding. So you'll find that you're not going to get the HTML right the very first time in a project like this, for the most part. Maybe you might get lucky if it's a really simple project, but for the most part, you're going to be coming back and forth, changing up your HTML in some ways to make it work. All right, so H2, we're going to say companies I've worked with. After that, we have just this list. It's an unordered list of logos, right? So yet another UL. So we're going to say UL companies, LI, and we're going to have an image. Source is images skillshare.svg. We'll just do Skillshare here, and then class is Skillshare. So I'm going to Shift Alt and down to replicate that. This one's going to be PS for Pluralsight, which I've created many courses for. And then this is going to be PS, and that's it. So we're going to take these two, copy them, and paste them. And that, my friends, is it for the HTML. So if we look at this, this is our HTML, which has no CSS applied to it. So of course it looks really, really ugly. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to focus on the CSS. So like I mentioned before, mobile first CSS. That means all of our CSS rule sets are going to be based on making it look good on mobile first. All right. Now there's desktop first, but really the best practice is mobile first. It just keeps your CSS rather, the default CSS without any media queries, which if you don't know what that is, you'll see what that is later on, but it keeps it as simple as possible. So you want to progressively enhance the app or the website, your user interface, starting from mobile, which is usually going to be the most simple because you're on a mobile device, you don't have as much room. And then when you get to tablet, you might add in some more things and change things up. And then you get to desktop, which you have everything. So you progressively enhance it. So what we're going to do is one of the things I like to do just in any project when I'm starting is to just reference everything and just say box sizing, border box. And what that's going to allow us to do is whenever you're dealing with margins and padding in relation to elements that are like 100% width, it's going to fix it so that it doesn't create like vertical scroll bars in certain areas. So this is something I just always add by default. We're going to do body here. So our very first tag is the body tag. Like if we look at in the HTML, our body tag's right there. So I usually like to get that out of the way. So we're going to reset any default margin. So I haven't saved this yet, but if you look up here, there's a little bit of margin. I like to deal with my own margin, right? So if I save it, it's going to get rid of that. Next up is the background. The background's just that purple color. So let me paste that. There we go. Now, if you look at the mock-up here, all the text is pretty much white. It is white. So we're going to reset all the text to color white. All right, and then finally, font family is going to be Montserrat. Now I have Montserrat installed as a font already on my computer, but most people won't. So in that case, you need to go to fonts.google.com and you need to import it into your CSS so that it's downloaded by those who don't already have it installed. So if I type in Montserrat, we'll go over here. We will select 300 and 800 for bold. All right, so we click on embed, import, grab this code here, and at the very top, I like to import the fonts, and there we go. Okay, so now we have next up, look at these ugly links, right? Nothing's blue like that in our prototype or our mock-up, so we're going to just say color white, and I don't want any text decoration, underlines that is. There we go. Next up, I'm also going to reference all of our unordered lists. We have like 3 or 4 of them. So we're just going to tape list style, none. That will get rid of the little bullet points next to them. We also have some margin and padding on each one of those. So we're going to take margin 0 and padding 0. There we go. Okay, so next up, what is our first element after the body tag? It's going to be hero wrapper. So let's work with that one. So hero wrapper, background, URL, /images. We have to get out of our CSS folder into the images folder and say bg.jpg. And also, so if I save that, we'll see that we want to use background size cover. All right, so cover, the cover property will ensure that it always stays, in view inside of that container. Okay, continuing on from there, we also have our wrapper, which is our next element, and this shows up multiple times in our document. So we're going to say wrapper. All right, so the wrapper is responsible for establishing the white space from the left of the device and the right of the device, and also the top and bottom. So on a desktop, we have a lot, but on a mobile, we don't want this much. So we're going to just focus on mobile. Ready? Or not ready. All right. So like mobile first. So padding is going to be 1.5. We'll try that out. M units. All right. And we're also going to say, let's see here. I may have screwed something up because that there was not supposed to happen. So whenever this sort of thing happens, you have to make sure that our HTML was structured correctly. So we want to make sure our closing div tags and all that is where it needs to be. So padding is 1.5 on a wrapper. I'm going to leave this in. Oh, look at that. That must have been like an error with the browser rendering, because it showed clearly this big, background section right here, but it went away. Okay. I'm glad that was just a hiccup there and not like an issue with my code. So now we're also going to make a max width property and set it to 1200 pixels. Now this won't do anything here. If we come out, we could see our wrapper right here. It ends up, actually, you won't really probably notice it at all, the effects of this, but what it's saying is when the browser gets to 1200 pixels max width, it's not going to take this wrapper and it's not going to keep on extending it outward beyond 1200. You'll see how this comes into play later on. Maybe I will comment that out at that point and just show you what that does. But for now, essentially, when the browser gets to, let's say this is 1200 pixels, we don't want this stuff to exceed the width of 1200 pixels. So that's why, because I don't want this over here, for instance. I don't want this over here. I don't want it to get real large indefinitely. So we're saying max width 1200. Okay. And then we're also going to do margin 0 in auto. And what that does is that will center everything, especially when we get out to, larger viewports. Okay, so now what we'll do is we're going to reference our header. All right, so our header element. We're going to display flex. Now when you do this automatically, watch what happens to the logo and the navigation. It, instead of doing just multiple rows stacked on top of each other, it's going to put them basically to the right and left. It creates 2 columns instead of rows. We're also going to put justify content space between, because look, this needs to go over there. The navigation goes over there. So to do that, there we go. Justify content space between right there. Now I have this zoomed up just so we could see it, but if I reset this, you could see it's actually quite a bit smaller. If I hit Control plus, we could change the scale of this, but by default at 100%, this is what everything looks like at the moment. All right, so now what next needs to change? We have this column and they're stacked on top of each other, but we need them in columns and not rows. So because we're using Sass, we can nest these inside of each other. Let's take our logo though, because that comes next actually in the HTML right here, a class logo. And we're going to say font weight is bold. There we go. And also we're going to have our nav UL. All right. Actually, we could probably get rid of nav right here specifically and just say unordered list, because when this goes to save, this is going to have header UL in the output of the CSS. So when we add a rule set, we'll see that behaves just fine. So now we're going to say display flex, just the same way we did up here. Display flex will take these and put them in their own columns. And then also our list items, we'll say LIA. We'll say padding is 0, and on the top and bottom, and then on the right and left is 0.6 M units. Just like that. Very cool stuff. So now we're starting to get somewhere. All right. Next up after that is going to be our hero content, right? Which is in reference to this stuff right here. So in terms of UI design fundamentals, what's wrong with this picture up here? Well, this content, this heading is very close to the logo in the navigation essentially up here, right? We need to push things down and give things room to breathe, as I always say. We need more white space. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll take our hero content. We're going to create margin, 4EM on the top. Now, if you just save it right there, it's going to put 4M units all around it, all four directions. But we want 0I on the right and left. And then we also want, I want a little bit less white space on the bottom. So I'm going to put 2M units instead. There we go. That's better. Now also, we're going to reference our subtitle, which is a reference to this teaching UI, UX, blah, blah, blah right there. And I'm just going to take margin bottom 0. And because it was a paragraph, yeah, this is a paragraph tag, right? I just wanted to get rid of any default padding, or margin rather. Next up, we have our light purple wrapper. All right, so light purple wrapper. We're going to say light purple wrapper. And inside of there, we're going to put that background. It's a lighter background color, and that color code happens to be right here. So there we go, we lightened it up a bit. Next up, we have our stats. So we already have wrapper defined, right? So UL class stats. So we're going to say stats. And inside of there, we're going to, this time we're going to use the grid, all right? So we used Flexbox, and that's fine to use. I want to show you how to do this using the grid. So we'll do display. All right, display grid doesn't do anything by default. And I'm going to show you a really cool, sort of more intermediate to advanced rule set here, or a property called grid template columns. And what we're going to do is repeat auto fit, min max, and I did a video tutorial specifically on this property or this little trick here. Min max, we're going to say 130 pixels to each one of those columns, and then 1 fractional unit as well. So what this ends up doing here is it will add the columns, but it will automatically make it responsive, or in other words, it will collapse them onto their own rows if they don't have enough room. So notice right there, you see L5, you see L5, you see L5. Now it just took the last one, 58 countries, and it put it onto its own column. And it's going to keep on doing that. So now there's, there's one here, one here, one here, one here, and then one there. So that's a cool way to potentially deal with something like that. We're also going to do justify content, space around, and then also, and you can't really notice the difference here. You could kind of notice the difference when you get into bigger resolutions. And then we're going to do a margin top of 2EM. Oops, there we go, just to push things down a bit. Because remember, in terms of UI design fundamentals, we have this amount of white space. We kind of want to have this amount of white space from that start of that new container. All right, next up, we're going to take our list items, and we're going to say margin bottom 1.5M units to push them away from each other because they're really condensed. Then we're going to take our strong element, and the strong element is wrapped around these real bold numbers right here. And we're going to say font size 1.4M units just to make them bigger. And then we also have a span element right after them, which is the labels like countries, courses, YouTube views, etc. And we're going to say display block. And that's going to push them onto their own row. We're also going to do text transform uppercase. All right, and then we're going to take the font size and really make it small, 0.75M units. There we go. All right, so we're getting somewhere. Okay, next up after this, we have our arrows, right? So we have an arrows class right here for these arrows. What I'm going to do, because we don't have a lot of space, I'm just going to get rid of them. So we're going to hide them. So display none. Goodbye, arrows. And they leave. Next up is our extended wrapper class. So our extended wrapper is right here, right? Technically, I guess that was before the arrows, but it doesn't matter. So our extended wrapper, it's going to be like our normal wrapper, except it's going to give us a little bit more room to work with, especially on desktop and tablet. So we're going to say extended wrapper, padding is going to be 0, and then 1.5 em units on the right and left, and 2 em units on the bottom. All right. We're also going to add a couple more properties. Again, max width is going to be 1230 pixels instead of 1200. And then margin 0 auto to get that centered. Next up after that is our carousel. So we're going to say ul.carousel, and we're going to margin bottom 1 em unit. So that just added a little bit of margin down there, or white space. Font size is going to be nope, wrong area. I'm looking in the wrong section. Sorry about that. List item. We're going to do a background. So we're going to give each card a background color, because remember, these have a different background, like this. It's lighter, and that happens to be this color code right here. There we go. And then padding will be 1 em unit. All right, and then margin bottom will be 1 em unit to separate them just a bit. After that, we have our block quote and cite. So the block quote is actually, this text right here. The block quote will be a margin of 0, just to get rid of any default. The block quote tag has its own margin. Font size will be 0.8 em units. We'll do a line height, because they're really like scrunched up. We want to give this a little bit more room. So line height will be 1.8 em units. And then we'll do margin bottom to push itself away from the author's name by 1 em units. There we go. We also have our cite. The cite has a specific pink color as shown here. So let's go ahead and reference that real quickly. We're also going to do font weight of bold. We're going to do font size of 0.80 em. Font style a normal. Position will be relative, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in a second. And then padding left will be 25 pixels. All right, so we need to create that little dash, right? So I'm making this position relative so that then I can do cite before, and we're going to use this before selector in order to add that little dash. So position absolute. So whenever you ever have an element that's position absolute inside of a position relative container, it allows you to move this element around using top and left and right and bottom in relation to the container right here, instead of in relation to the document as a whole, if that makes sense. I'll show you exactly what I mean in a second. So let's go ahead and make left 0. We're also going to do top of 10 pixels. Can't see it yet because we haven't styled it. We'll do height of like 1 pixels, and then width of 20 pixels. And we'll do a border bottom. This is our last property, 1 pixel solid white. So now we could see this here. And basically, if I were to take this away, it's hidden, right? And that's because it's probably like way up here. It's right there actually. We don't want that, so we use position relative. All right, and now it's actually a little bit down further than I would like it to be. I'm not sure what happened because that's what it was in my reference code. But if we change this to like 6 pixels, that's a little bit better right there. Yeah. Okay, so that works. There we go. All right, so we're almost done with our mobile first CSS. Then we have to get it working. Obviously, it's not quite right here. We're almost done. So we need to do the company section down here. So we have an H2 element, which is this element right here. So we're going to say H2. We're going to say text align. We're going to center this one. Position relative. And again, we're doing the same little position relative trick because we're going to do H2 before in order to create this little dash right here. So you kind of already know how this works. So I'm just going to paste these rule sets in. We have content blank, position absolute, height is 5 pixels, width is 30 pixels. The background color is that high contrast pink, and then the top is -0.3 em units. And there we go, it's right there. After that, we have our companies, and this is an unordered list. Text align, oh yeah, it is an unordered list, so text align center, and we want to opacity 0.4, not 0.4 em, sorry, just 0.4. And then also we're going to do a list items. Let's push this down a bit. Margin 2 em on the top and bottom, 0 on the right and left. That way it pushes, it gives it white space in there. And then our Skillshare class is going to be width of 100 pixels. And then our PS for Pluralsight is going to be a width of 200 pixels. And there we go. That right there, my friends, is the mobile first CSS and a mobile first just view of our design. So if we come out, we have certain things that we can really change about this big time. Oh, and by the way, we can see how now the max width of 1200 pixels works. It's once it gets to 1200 pixels, it stays. It's not fluid to the full width of the browser anymore. If I were to take that off, just to show you, where are we at? We are right here. So if I were to take that off, we'll see how the wrapper class that I just took that off, everything just extends. It makes it hard to scan the site when it's so big. So that's the purpose of that. So let's save that. All right, so there's certain things that we can do to really make adjustments here when we get out into larger phones and like tablets, for instance. So the first thing that I want to do is look down here. We have a lot of room when we're out here. Not so much here. They need to be stacked on top of each other, but when we get out a little bit larger, we have more room to place these things side by side. So what we'll do is create a media query at media, min width, 500 pixels or so. And by the way, in case you didn't know it, whether you're using Chrome or Firefox, Control-Shift-I will get you out the DevTools. And whenever you change the width of the browser, you'll see the width property right there. It hides, but when you're actively doing it, just look up here, you'll see it. It tells you it's 475. Around 500 pixels is where we're going to have enough room to situate these things right and left of each other. So now what we'll do is put in companies, and we're going to display grid here, grid template, columns will be repeat to an auto. And now when we get beyond 500, there we go. Very cool. So we've condensed things essentially. All right. That's all I'm going to do for that media query. I don't think anything else needs to change because we still don't have enough room, in my opinion, to put these two side by side. But very quickly after, we will. So I'm going to copy this code, simply change this to 650 or so. And then a really cool trick to increase the font size in your margin and paddings, as long as you used em units, is to change the body's font size property. By default, it's 16 pixels. We're going to up this to 18 pixels. So we're going to save that. Now, right when we saved it, everything everything scaled up essentially. So if we come down, you're going to notice before 650 pixels, we have a certain view, and then when we get to 650, everything jumps up right there. That's where 650 is at. So it just scales everything up a bit, which makes sense because you're on larger devices and you can do so. Okay, next up, we're going to take our wrapper, and our wrapper is responsible for defining the white space. So our padding, we're going to bump that up from 1 em unit and then also 4 M units on the right and left. All right, so now here we are before 650, at 650, it's establishing more white space on the intersection. Also, our carousel container, we're going to display flex. And what that's going to do, let's see, it is not working the way I thought it would. All right, so let's make sure I have everything. Oh, we have an issue with our CSS. What is going on? Oh, okay. So I figured it out. Basically, this is UL class carousel, and I'm referencing carousel container. The reason we're doing it didn't show a difference is because we made carousel container a display flex, but I don't have the arrows hidden or visible. So what this is going to do, if we take arrows and we say, let's see here, display block, because those were display hidden by default. Now it's going to show them. When I take display flex off, that's what happens. So that's why nothing was happening. I was confused. So now let's fix the arrows. They're looking pretty bad here. So let's get to right there. So our arrows are too large. So we need to do width of about 40 pixels. And then also a cursor pointer. Right now, before I save, it doesn't change the cursor. So that's what that will do. There we go. Now it's a little hand. And then also margin 0.5 M units just to push it away from each other. Also, our right class, which is added onto this one specifically, so we can change it. We can do transform, rotate Z, and then 180 degrees will flip it. Or at least I thought it would. Let's see here. Maybe I didn't add the right class into HTML. Let's see. Yep, this needs to go right here. Now it's flipped. See, that's facing that way, and this is facing that way. Okay. Now going back to our SAS file, our UL carousel, we're going to display flex. Now it's going to have the behavior like I wanted to. It's going to take those two and put them right next to each other. No white space in the middle, so we got to fix that. So we're going to say margin bottom first. We'll do 0 to get rid of that. Our list items inside of it are going to have a margin right of 1 M units. All right, so when you do margin right on a list item, it's going to add it to both the end one too. So we need to fix that in a second. But first, let me get this. Margin bottom is going to be 0. And then also padding will be 2 M units. And then we will say and last child. This will target the very last list item, which is right here. We're going to margin right 0. There we go. So now it's even all around. All right. So now what we're going to do is reference our companies. All right. So just here, we're going to say display flex. And this is going to make sure that all of them will be just on the same row. There we go. And then also justify content. If I can type, space between. All right. So remember, we are zoomed up. Here's 100%. Here's at 110 or so. And this is looking pretty good at this viewport for that media query. We're almost done actually, but not quite. Now we're going to target another media query at media, min width, 853 pixels. We're going to say body is font size. We had 18 in the previous media query. We're going to make this 20, so watch what happens. So now it jumps up from here to there. All right, and our stats, we're going to display flex, and that just changes them a bit in how they're rendered. We're going to do justify content, space between. So if we save that, it's going to push them from the very left to the right. And also get rid of any margin that we added, like that. Nice. Then we're going to take our companies. We're going to say grid template columns, repeat for auto. All right, and we're also going to take our H1 element, bump up the font size to 2.5 em units. All right, so that just made it larger. Also, our subtitle is going to be 1.2 em units. So we bump that up a bit. We're going to take our H2, text align left it, because right now it's centered. Before I save, you'll see it's centered. So now it pushes it over. Let me come down here. And also, we're going to font size increase that to 2 em units. So now it's larger. All right, we're going to have V padding. So we added that on the last wrapper. So the padding for this, I wanted to be 4 em units all around. And our light purple wrapper, which is this section right here, we're going to say, let's see here, light purple wrapper is going to have a padding bottom of 4 em units. So we're really pushing this down so that we can push this up and give us enough space so that it's not close, to this section right there. Then we're going to take our move up class, which is on the very last wrapper, margin top, -7 em units seem to work well, and there we go. Moves all that stuff up. All right, the very last thing I'm going to do, we only have one more media query with just a couple rule sets. At media, min width, 1200. What I'm going to do now is add in the little dividers between these elements. So we're going to take our stats, li, border right, 1 pixel solid. Let me just paste in the RGB value here, right there. Padding right will be 5%. All right, we don't want one at the end, so we'll say and last child, border 0. There, and now we got rid of it. And that's it. All right, so let's take a look at this specifically here. And we'll look at mobile here. So this is our mobile view. This is what it looks like on a phone, for instance. Coming out here into a large phone, small tablet. Everything's looking solid. Again, when I'm doing this and pulling this out, we want to make sure all of our UI design fundamentals are looking good, because that's very important. And then here we go. When we get out, look at my head. It's just growing and growing and growing. That's a horrible picture, by the way. So yeah, and this is basically it, and quite close to this right here. Maybe a little bit some differences in terms of font size, font weight perhaps, and also a little bit of spacing. But for the most part, this is quite close. Yeah, I probably, now that I look at it, I should increase the, like if we get these side by side, we could see that there's more white space here. And again, that's just a matter of defining larger margins in between these elements. But for the most part, it is pretty close. All right, all. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you're new to this process of HTML and CSS and front-end development and taking, something like a mock-up and translating it to HTML and CSS and trying to make it work in a browser, it's tough at first. It requires a lot of practice in order to develop the muscle memory and just the basic memory in and of itself to remember how to do all these various things and work with all the various HTML elements as well as the CSS properties. So don't get discouraged if you were like, wow, that is so crazy. Start small. This is more of like a robust project. Start with a real simple project. Of course, there's a lot of great courses out there. I have my own HTML CSS crash course for both 2020 and 2019. So look at those, do a channel search. A lot of other people have stuff, and just keep at it, keep consistent. It will come along. All right, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys next time.